Episode 41, Star Wars versus Star Trek. Welcome to the Visionary Variety Podcast, where we cover cool stuff like photo, video, film, books, and technology. So, switch on your brain and enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the Visionary Variety Podcast. I am Daniel Grove, one of the hosts of the show. We've also got with us Nate Gunn.
Hey.
And our special guest from Boise, Idaho, Josh Howell.
Hello.
So glad to have you back on the show. I knew this was a perfect episode to have you with us to discuss. We're going to be talking about Star Wars and Star Trek.
Beam me up.
Aren't they the same, though?
We're going to try and not get in a fight.
I think they're the same.
What?
What,
The
Nate?
same?
They're both about stars, right?
About ships.
Stars have a significantly non-important role in Star Wars.
Yeah.
I don't know. Before we get into this heated discussion, Josh, how has your week been?
It's been a pretty good week. I mean, nice, cool weather up here, clear skies. You know, not dealing with the rain or the fog like y'all are dealing with down in Texas.
Yep, lots of that.
Yeah, but it's been a good week. Looking forward to the Boise State football game this weekend and get to go shoot some teenagers playing paintball.
Who's playing at the game?
Boise State and Fresno State. So go Broncos.
Nice. That'll be fun.
Yeah.
Hopefully it'll be a nice weather for that game.
I think it's supposed to be down in the 30s.
Oh.
So, yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't even know what that is in Texas. That's weather that we will close up everything.
Yes.
Shut down the entire government of Texas.
Yeah. Anything below, 60 degrees down there, people freak out.
Yeah. Close the schools, close the stores. And Nate, how's your week been? Anything interesting going on?
It has been a week. Outside of the norm of just tons and tons of editing. Got a wedding this weekend.
When I have editing marathons for photography, it's great because I can listen to music. But when you're editing video, you really can't do that, right?
It depends. I've been doing editing for so long now that I kind of remember the day, which sounds kind of funny. You should, but I'll be sitting there editing. I'm like, oh yeah, I know what they're saying. So I just kind of blank it out. Sometimes I have a movie on.
Nice.
To be honest with you, I'm
Wow.
just because I was there. If I wasn't there, then it's a little bit different. Sometimes I'll brush through, and then at least for the ceremony part, it's kind of just cut between different angles, and then the pre-wedding and after the wedding at the ceremony. Honestly, you're just looking for the best of the best. It's right when you start doing the dances and toast and all the fun stuff, you kind of have to pay attention. I mean, you pay attention to the whole thing, but
I listen to a lot of electronic music when I edit my photos. It just kind of keeps my brain active and keeps me moving and keeps me from falling asleep.
I'm not gonna lie, I fell asleep at my desk and I was like, what just happened? And people are like, where are you at? And I'm like, asleep.
Is Nate alive? What happened? What's going on? Well, in my neck of the woods, I have been really busy this week and it's not slowing down, which is good. I'm not complaining. This morning, I had a fun photo shoot with a cosplay friend of mine. She was not cosplaying this time, but I've shot her at a convention before. Today, she was wearing a beautiful wedding dress, and she had her hair dyed very, very green. And we were at this amazing location that I found. It's a dried up creek bed, or pretty much a riverbed, actually. And it's just beautiful location. I've never seen anyone shoot there, so I feel special. I feel like I'm the only one to ever use it, but probably not, but as far as I know. And so it was a really great location. If you want to see these pictures, go to my Instagram, my Facebook photography page, or if you're for friends, go to my personal page. I shared some photos from the shoot there. And you can't miss it. White wedding dress and green hair.
Those rocks, they look very futuristic.
Do they?
I think so.
They look like an alien planet to me.
I mean, the trees and the highway kind of mess it up.
Yeah,
but
normal. But the rocks, alien rocks.
If you just look down, you're good.
Look at that ground. Would you just look at it? Yeah, it's a really cool location. And I was this morning's photo shoot was really a test drive of the spot for my Sunday photo shoot, which is a big deal there. What I'm doing on Sunday is I've got a group of 4 redheaded women that are going to dress up like amazing Viking warriors. And it's going to be a ton of fun. It's going to be wild. And anywhere where there's one redhead, it's something. But I've got 4 of them in one place. I don't know what's going to happen. Tomorrow, I am speaking with a group of high school. It's a homeschool co-op. I'm going to be sharing with them about my photography story and some of the technical side of what I use to make what I make. I'm hoping to really inspire them and show them some really cool stuff that'll get them jazzed up about photography.
You're gonna blow their mind.
Yeah, I want to blow their little innocent brains to smithereens.
I think if you went in with that, I think the parents would be like, never mind.
They cover their children's eyes and slowly walk backwards out of the room with them.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Come on, little Tommy, scary man with a beard. All right, well, let's get into this episode. This is going to be a great one. Before we get into talking about the differences and even some similarities of the two franchises, let's talk about science fiction. I'm going to admit, sci-fi, in a broad sense, is my favorite genre. I love sci-fi. I have, unashamedly, I will admit, I have listened to, I don't know, probably 50 science fiction books back to back. Audiobooks.
Dang.
It's just what keeps me interested and alert while I'm driving, which I do a lot of for my day job. So it's just sci-fi. I don't know. It's just it for me. Maybe I need to branch out, but yeah, I listen to a lot of sci-fi. So I love sci-fi, but something that I've learned is that in literature and movies, sci-fi can take on so many different flavors and styles and levels of realness versus levels of character building and hero's journey type stories. And that's when you start to drift away from it being a fiction about science or a story about fictional science, and you're kind of getting into something else, which we'll call fantasy. For lack of better terms, we're going to call this a fantasy or a fairy tale story. And that's when we're focusing on fantastical situations or characters, coming from nothing, becoming the hero of the galaxy or the savior of the whole planet, similar to Flash Gordon and, stories like Luke, just starting from nowhere and becoming the savior, doing all this wild stuff and, getting the girl, swooping in, saving the day. That's where we're kind of branching into, we possibly may be branching into fantasy stories and fairy tale style stories. Now, they may be in space, there may be spaceships and lasers and robots, but that doesn't make it a true science fiction. So, I just wanted to kind of outline some ideas here. Here's a quote from one of my favorite authors, Arthur C. Clarke, who wrote Space Odyssey 2001. "Science fiction is something that could happen, but usually you wouldn't want it to. Fantasy is something that couldn't happen, though often you only wish that it could."
That's a brilliant way to talk about the differences. I mean, you don't get much simpler, but yet profound at the same time.
Yeah, it's nice and simple, but it's true. Some books are getting categorized as speculative fiction. So that means that we're speculating as to what might happen in the future, which Star Trek is an example of that. Star Trek is taking current, real day, our universe, Earth, and they're just fast forwarding 2, 3, 4, 600 years, and then going on beyond that. And we're speculating, hey, what might happen as we develop space technology? Well, we'll find aliens. Okay, how are we going to deal with these aliens? They're speculating and speculating, and that's how they're building these universes and there's these fictional stories. So sci-fi, in true sci-fi is really speculating about the future. If the story is a current day story, then they're now speculating as to how life will be changed or improved, or maybe not improved, if, say, artificial intelligence comes to life suddenly and it happens to be called Skynet. So just one example. Hopefully you're kind of grasping the fact that they're speculating what the future will hold and what it's going to be like as technology improves. Something that I always ask myself when I'm curious as to how to categorize a book or a story is I try to ask myself, what role is science playing in this story? And obviously it's going to be pseudoscience. We don't have space travel, we don't have time travel, but is science just a side character? Like, is it just kind of in the background to keep things interesting or to make a plot? Or is the science like a crucial part of what the character's doing? In Star Trek, they usually explain, and maybe too much, good old technobabble. They explain the science that's happening in at least every episode. I think it's safe to say there's some explanation happening. So in a lot of science fiction, we have that classic scene, the cliche, where the smart scientist or the hardened space traveler has to sit down and explain to the clueless main character, this is how wormholes work, and this is how time travel works, and this is how, this works. There's always that exposition, and it always has to be there so that the audience has a little bit of a clue how the pseudoscience is going to work, and then how it's not going to work. Maybe there's limitations, maybe there's downsides, maybe you need a battery, There's always problems and plot holes tied into that technology. Star Wars is a little different. Now, they don't go explaining technologies like Star Trek does. And a lot of times the science just works somehow to support the action and the adventure and the hero or the villain. Not always. There's some exposition, some explanation in Star Wars, but it's not as prevalent as it is in Star Trek. Let's kind of go sort of a round table and explain sort of our history and our past with each franchise. Don't want to take too long, but I just want you, the listener out there, to understand where each of us are coming from. All right, so Josh, why don't you start us off?
I actually started watching Westerns with my dad and my grandpa. Interestingly enough, Gene Roddenberry, creator of Star Trek, actually, when he pitched Star Trek to the studios, he pitched it as a Western in space. And if you kind of think of Star Trek in those terms, the good guy moseys on into a new town that has its problems, has its different people, different culture, and they take care of the problem. I mean, it's kind of like what Star Trek does. So it was almost just a gradual and almost a logical step for me to go from Westerns, which at that time really weren't the quote unquote cool thing to be watching anyway, and go into sci-fi. And as soon as I started watching Star Trek, it just grabbed me. And I've been a Trekkie since then. Star Wars is okay, but Star Trek still better than Star Wars. So yeah, that's just a little bit. And I know those are fighting words, but hey, if you want to fight, I'm in Boise, Idaho. Bring it.
Why I oughta. Cool. All right, Nate, how about you?
Yeah, I have similar stories with stuff with family, but I grew up with a family that just oozed comics and sci-fi and all that fun stuff. And
sounds messy.
Yeah. It was. And so I remember my dad's like, hey, we're going to watch Star Wars. I was like, what is that? And then we just kind of got from there, it just kind of exploded. And then I was like, I remember them watching a TV show with Star Trek. I don't know what that is, but but I was like, what the heck is that? And he's like, well, this is Star Trek. I was like, well, is it like part 2 of the same thing?
Different star?
I had no idea. And so he's like, no, this is a TV show and it's been going on before Star Wars. I'm like, what? And so he said, but, so it just kind of unraveled, it kicked the snowball down the hill. And I just kind of got into it myself. And, here we are. And now we're arguing.
I grew up watching Star Trek. I believe it was The Next Generation. And for a while, we watched it religiously every evening with my family. And that was really great. I really love that. Those episodes, the variety from episode to episode really was inspiring to my imagination and really opened, my mind to ideas and challenging thoughts. Star Trek really makes you think about stuff.
Yeah.
And I that was really great for my young brain. I was also deeply into Star Wars just because of the simplicity and the fun factor of it. Like Star Trek was like intellectual for me. Star Wars was entertaining to me. And I really liked both, although in my teen years, I got away from watching Star Trek and really even keeping up with it on my own time. And I was really diving into Star Wars just because I loved the entertainment, the elements of it, the basic storytelling. Yeah. So I'm definitely way more on the Star Wars side, and I know quite a bit about Star Wars canon and non-canon, but I don't really know a lot about Star Trek canon or non-canon. And ashamedly, I have a lot of catching up. I need to rewatch DS9. That's kind of my first step, is I really want to rewatch that and then kind of go from there and maybe watch Next Generation again after that. I do appreciate and value Star Trek for what it is. I just kind of like them both for different things, but I'm way more into the Star Wars side. All right. Well, with all that being said, I liked, Josh, how you brought up Gene Roddenberry's quote about him saying that it was pitched as a Western in space. And that does really set up the general concept of how and why it was so episodic. Is they would come upon a new planet, they would beam down, save the day, or help the local people realize something bigger than themselves, or help the advanced people realize something simpler, like love. And then they would move on. They would save the day and move on. They would kind of learn and grow from these experiences. But it was sort of that in and out kind of thing. And that really worked for a TV show. And something that something that came to mind when I was planning this episode was that, it's a no-brainer, but I realized that Star Trek is more of a TV series-based franchise, at least originally.
Yes.
Whereas Star Wars has always been originally movie-based. And it's really not even until, the past, maybe decade when they started doing the animated series. But Star Wars with such space opera themes and big hero action just works better on the big screen, I feel.
Yeah.
And Star Trek is a great TV show setup because there's always new challenges and new thoughts and ways to think of the universe, in terms of morality, good and bad, and civilization, things like that. And Star Trek just, because it's episodic and it's a show and multiple series now, they just have so many opportunities to bring in really great philosophy and ideas, and I like that. But they're just so different, it's hard to even compare them. Someone said, I asked this question online, I was like, what are your favorites and why, versus Star Trek versus Star Wars? And one guy's like, can you even compare them? I know he's really just trying to say that Star Trek's better. I could just, with the Force, I could just tell what he was trying to imply. But
I know your mind tricks.
See what I did there? But I innocently reinterpreted it on my own as really realizing you're right. You really can't compare them 100% because they're not, it's apples and oranges because of the different formats they're in and different storytelling devices that they use. Speaking of that, let's zoom in on each series and kind of look at it in a general way. So Star Wars takes place a long, long time ago, which is different.
And
Star Trek is
far, far away
in the future. Yeah, it's Star Wars isn't even in our galaxy, so they're already setting up this really interesting premise where they don't have to follow rules. They don't have to set things up for Earth history, or they don't have to continue on and tell the future of Earth history. They don't even have Earth, which is kind of refreshing. Sci-fi has always got an Earth in there.
Mm-hmm.
So Star Wars is already breaking a lot of rules, and I'm sure I would love to have felt and known the reaction when that line came up and people reading that for the first time in the 70s. Like, that must have been like a mind-blowing experience. Like, another galaxy in the past? How are there spaceships in the past? It's just, it goes against the grain, and I like that. So Star Wars is looking into the past, and it's really examining very basic tenets of life and morality, equality between alien races and the interaction between them. It also focuses on the mystical, which is where the fairy tale and the fantasy side of this comes in. We've got the Force. The Force is sentient. It's also immaterial. Sometimes it is material because there's stupid midichlorians in all their dang cells, which is ridiculous. One of the biggest flubs of Star Wars canon was that. But and Jar Jar Binks. But the Force is very mystical, and they explain it in philosophical and spiritual terms, but there's never a scientific explanation. Like, oh yes, there literally is a sentient being in this, in this star quadrant that is the heart of the Force. Or they don't try too much, which is good. It keeps the magic alive. It keeps the mystery, and that helps the story move along. You don't think too much about it. You just accept it. So there's also a focus on things like inner peace. There's a lot of meditation. The Jedis, they fight best when they're calm. They fight best when they're pushing their, natural human emotions aside, and they're just letting the Force flow through them. It's kind of you're a conduit for this bigger thing. You don't really see that idea in Star Trek. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's not a lot of mystical stuff. It's very much an atheist worldview. There's no true deity behind everything. It's just science and material universe. Josh, is that accurate?
It's accurate from the human point of view. They do come across other alien races and other cultures that will bring in their form of religion and their deity. So there is a little bit of the aspect of the mystical in that sense, but as a basis, the show is pretty much rooted in we're scientists, we're out here exploring, we have to be able to explain everything has an explanation, rational. Everything's rational. So
naturalistic universe. Even when there's weird things like Q and other dimensional stuff happening, there's eventually some form of explanation that is still rational and scientific. And Gene Roddenberry was, I believe, he was a pretty avid atheist, and he didn't want. Star Trek is looking into the future of humankind, and in his view of the best future of mankind, there is no religion. There's also no money. I don't know how that works, but maybe you can help me understand that part. So the advanced and progressive and what is it, 26th century, 24th century?
26th century, I believe.
For Next Generation?
Yeah, I believe it's the 26th century in Next Gen.
Yeah, so 26th century humans are just so woke that there's no need for mystical religions and stuff like that. So they're just super woke. And that plays out in the rest in those stories. But Star Wars is sort of the opposite. There's mystical things happening that eventually people will have to come to accept. Like Han Solo, he has to accept the fact that the Force is real eventually, because he says it's all real, all of it, because he's seen it firsthand. He can't access it, he can't understand it, but he has to accept that it's real. Yeah, that we know. That would be weird. Han using the Force? No. That's almost as bad as R2-D2 using the Force, which apparently happened in a comic book a long time ago.
Ooh.
Yeah. It's pretty bad. Another low point for the Star Wars canon. I'm sure Star Trek's got their low points.
Oh, no, it definitely does, but it still doesn't get lower than Jar Jar Binks.
Oh my goodness. I knew that was going to come up.
Yeah. So Star Wars, along with meditation and inner peace, there is the searching for truth, which is usually found inside yourself. You find the truth. You find the way by going inwards instead of going outwards and using scientific method to explore and test things. You are using emotions, and you're using, destiny and fate and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. Also, good and evil is handled very differently in Star Wars universe, because it's the good guys and the bad guys. If I show you any character that's in Star Wars, if you know about Star Wars, you can say, oh, good guy, bad guy, good guy, bad guy, good, bad, rebel, empire, things like that. It's super black and white. But Star Trek they explore the gray areas, mm-hmm. and they explore the rest of it. Well, sure, this alien was, attacking or seen as totally bad in the beginning of the episode, but as they get to know them more and get the full story, they realize, they maybe were doing something bad, but there's also good behind it, or they are good, but they're doing bad things unintentionally. So there's a lot of morality that comes into play in Star Trek. And that's another thing that I love about it, is it's a little more realistic. Yeah. I know there's more than just humans in the show, but they're exploring human nature through the vehicle of sci-fi storytelling. Mm-hmm. And they just get to dive deeper into that, and in a way that Star Wars doesn't do too much. There are some neutral characters in Star Wars that have done regrettable things, but still have, good hearts, or vice versa. That's one big difference, I think, in Star Wars and Star Trek is the morality, good versus evil question. And lastly, Star Wars focuses on the hero's journey, which in my mind just brings up the name Skywalker. More and more Skywalkers. When is it going to end? I am relieved to know that Rey is not a Skywalker, as far as we've been revealed. If she is, it'll be a lot of what's happening moments. But as far as we know, Rey is not a Skywalker. And we're finally getting to that transitionary point in the franchise where they're like, okay, we've had enough Skywalker stuff for 6 movies and TV shows and all this jazz. Let's move on. And I'm relieved. It's about time. We need to explore more corners of this galaxy and meet other characters instead of just Skywalkers and losing their hands and all the bad stuff they do.
Well, it's time to start being more like Star Trek, and there's more than just one family out there.
For all we know, there could have been epics and, saving the day stuff happening on other planets that are way more grand and amazing than the movies ever showed. But we just haven't been looking at the right planet. We've just been following the little Skywalker family.
Yep.
We don't know. So one thing that I love about the Star Wars universe is that I feel like there has to be stuff happening on other planets simultaneously. And I guess that idea is enforced over and over because there's so many books coming out that overlap, and there's things happening on this planet at the same time as this planet. And, characters have stories that never touch each other. They don't even know about each other, but they are playing a part in, this battle or this overrunning of the government, or you know what I'm saying? There's a very multitasking kind of story in the galaxy. Whereas Star Trek, I feel like, I don't know, there's got to be other stuff happening simultaneously, but I just feel like there's a lot of main stuff that we're following, like one ship, one captain. Josh, do you have any rebuttals to that? I mean, am I totally wrong?
Well, no, I mean,
is there overlap?
There is, and especially I notice the overlap more in the Next Generation and Deep Space Nine than even in the original series. Voyager, definitely, it didn't seem like there was a whole lot of overlap just because of the basis of their show. But you get these characters, especially with Deep Space Nine, with it being on a space station, so everybody kind of having to come to them. And so you get the outside, you get, a Cardassian coming in and going, well, this is what I just dealt with. And, in the episode before, they get, a message from Starfleet saying, hey, something's happening on Cardassia. So they wrap it very nicely. So you get all of those outside perspectives, even if you're just on one point of view. Even and then with Next Gen, I mean, being on one ship the entire series, you still get that outside. Oh, hey, there is stuff going on outside of this ship, and you know about it. You just may not know what it is.
Yeah, and those things, do they get kind of cross-referenced or like Easter egged in other series? Does that happen a lot? Like this war or this whatever?
It definitely did. Towards the end of Next Generation, when Deep Space Nine was on, there was an overlap, and so there was an overlap of characters. One of the characters from Next Gen went over to Deep Space Nine and became one of the main characters, and then actually Lieutenant Worf from Next Generation became a member of Deep Space Nine, and so there was some characters going from show to show, and then there was some storyline that was definitely getting crossed over, which was nice. Cool. And Star Trek actually even hit on the crossover with the original series and Next Generation in the movie the movie Generations, where they brought in Captain Kirk and Captain Picard, and they meet, and they have to go on essentially a mission together, and so it still pays homage to the past, and so that it's all one timeline. It all works together, and then same thing with Star Wars. Star Wars has definitely wrapped everything within its universe, which is the cool thing about Star Wars and Star Trek. You get those grand universes that they're creating, and you can just dive in as deep as you want to go.
Yeah, it's cool. I love all the pseudo history that's built up, and you can look at timelines and see things just happening all over the place. It makes me wonder, like when I'm reading a Star Wars book or I'm watching a movie where I'm like loving what I'm reading or watching, at the same time I'm like, ooh, but what's happening on Alderaan, or what's happening back at Tatooine? Like, how is this stuff affecting the other people? And I'm like, dude, there could be just a whole book series written about just this little idea I just had, That's just how deep, the universe is. And I really like that aspect of it. It's kind of like a sandbox galaxy where there's just a lot of stuff happening.
Yeah.
So I talked about earlier, Star Trek is, looking into the past, has a very black and white version of morality. There's a lot of mystical stuff that's just never really explained, and people take it for face value. Star Trek, however, is looking into the future of mankind, and it's based off of our Earth. This is not like an alternate world of ours. This is our Earth in the future. And it's very practical in terms of how can mankind be better and, face the galaxy with fairness and being progressive. And even though they are encountering alien cultures that have really wild moralities or, different religions and cults and histories and political stuff, like how can they approach a totally alien civilization and still, find the good in them and also help them progress as well and kind of, join mankind in this evolution. Really, it's really just kind of a step of evolution, is going into the stars and being a civil sentient race, in the big picture of things in the galaxy. And so it's really a journey about mankind as a whole is Star Trek, whereas Star Wars is the hero's journey. Maybe just one hero, but usually we see kind of a family, going with this journey together. But I feel like that's kind of the biggest, most basic differences between the two.
For sure. We've kind of talked about a little bit about what Star Trek is and what Star Wars is. I'm the Trekkie on this podcast. I know a little bit about Star Wars. I enjoy the movies. I don't dive into the canon and the pseudo history and the books and all that stuff. I watch the movies for what they are, and I enjoy them. As the outsider, could you explain to me, if you know, where George Lucas was drawing some of his inspiration from?
Yeah, one of the big influences that kind of drove George Lucas to fall in love with certain things, such as swords and samurai outfits and battle techniques, was the samurai films made by Akira Kurosawa. So he loved those, and they really, stuck in his mind. So when he's making the sci-fi fantasy, a lot of those ideas came out into fruition, such as the lightsabers, Darth Vader's helmet, the stormtrooper's armor, just that whole idea.
Yeah.
So that's a big influence of George Lucas's. I wish I knew if I could validate this or not, but I did read that he was influenced by some other science fiction books, or really fantasy books of his time, such as Dune. There was that mystical and messianic character. Of course, lots of sand. Another book that I had read that he was influenced by was John Carter of Mars, and of course Flash Gordon with all the different planets and wild settings. So that kind of, some of those things explain and sort of help you understand like where the Force came from. There's a lot of diverse planets and jumping between planets, different scenes and settings, large wild monsters and beasts, which are really just aliens, and of course the swords and the lightsabers. Yeah, George Lucas pulled from a lot of things, and just kind of made something sort of new, which you got to give it to him. He was pretty creative, even though he was stealing ideas from other people. But hey, who isn't? Do you know what Gene Roddenberry was influenced by for Star Trek?
As far as Star Trek goes, the only thing that I really know that he was influenced by were the westerns. The westerns that were on TV at the time. It is that formula that of the westerns. The good guy shows up in the white hat with the gun. The gunslinger shows up, comes into a new town, new people, new problems, and he helps them with those problems, and then moves on to the next town. And that's almost the formula that they've kept. I mean, from the original series to Next Gen to Deep Space Nine to Voyager to Discovery now, which I will say I think Discovery is probably the best Star Trek TV series since Next Gen. Okay. I like Deep Space Nine. I liked Voyager, but Discovery is just really, really good. I mean, especially that first season, there was a lot. You could see some Star Wars influences. There was definitely a lot more outside, a lot more battles between the ships, and there was more hand-to-hand combat. It was just a good season, and I'm looking forward to season 2 coming out. I believe in January is when season 2 hit.
Discovery takes place as like the second earliest story series in the whole Star Trek universe. Enterprise is first.
Yes.
And then Discovery takes place kind of within just about 100 years after Enterprise.
Yeah. So timeline-wise, it's Enterprise, then Discovery, original series, Next Gen, Deep Space Nine, Voyager. We definitely, if you've not seen Discovery, I'm not going to spoil it, but there's a pretty epic scene in the season finale on season 1 that ties in with the original series. So
that's cool.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun second season, I think.
It looks beautifully made. I would really like to watch Discovery. Yeah,
it is. It really is. The special effects, the cinematography, I mean, the storyline, I mean, it's written by Trekkies. I mean, these are people that grew up watching Star Trek, that are passionate about it, that love it, and they got it made. And the unfortunate thing is it's only on the CBS. It's CBS Online. Ooh. It's not even. Yeah, it's not even on TV. I haven't watched it. But hey, it's worth the I think it's $6 a month.
Josh, what are some things that you have problems with in the Star Wars franchise?
Jar Jar Binks.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair point.
No. Honestly, I mean, of course, I'm a Trekkie, so I've got a different perspective. I think my biggest problem is there just isn't a lot of explanation, and I understand the format. I mean, I would like to know more about who is Yoda.
And no one knows that one.
I mean, and it's who's more about Yoda, more about some of these characters, and I appreciate the fact that Star Wars tried to give us that backstory on Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker. They did give us the backstory, but I will say, in my opinion, poorly they gave that to us. And they're giving us those backstories now in the Star Wars Stories movies. And so some of the problems that I've had, they're almost like they're going back now and solving. The whole, I mean, with Solo coming out, you know, you see Han Solo and Lando Calrissian as adults, as older adults, and you know that they've got this weird kind of relationship, but they never explained it until now. And so, I mean, all in all, I really don't have major issues with Star Wars, except for the lack of explanation on some things.
Yeah. Are you unimpressed with the fact that, like, let's say the Death Star was destroyed by that silly ventilation vent, right? The shaft. So that's silly.
Yeah.
Very lucky. Yeah. But they made a whole movie to explain it. Kind of along the lines of what you're saying.
So I appreciated the fact that it was an entire movie explaining why they had a ventilation shaft. Yeah.
Wait. Did you see the robot chicken thing about the engineer?
No.
That made the shaft?
No.
It's great. There's a robot chicken bit about basically there's like a meeting with this guy and he's like, look, I had to put ventilation shafts in the Death Star. I didn't know they'd send a bomb down one. It's so funny. And this poor guy gets like hounded and I don't know, all this stuff happens to him because he's the one that made the shaft and the design. It was before Rogue One came out, but it was hilarious.
I know Family Guy, they did their spoof of Star Wars, and Stewie was Darth Vader, and he was talking about the ventilation shaft. He's like, can't we just cover it? And the guy's like, well, do you want me to get some bids, or do you just want me to pay for it? And like, no, get some bids. Get some bids. We need to see if we can afford it.
Budget.
But, you know, there were little things, you know, like that. I mean, of course, of course, it's a similarity between Star Wars and Star Trek where you get the stormtroopers that just seem like they cannot hit anything. And, you know, the red shirts in Star Trek that seem to be hit by everything.
So funny.
So, you know, there's little things like that you just kind of have to go, it is what it is.
You know, about like stormtroopers, the hardest thing I've always had is when you go back to like, I think episode 4 in Obi-Wan as an older Obi-Wan, he's like, ooh, Imperial stormtroopers, the most deadly shot. I'm like, are they though? Because like if you go back and watch, it's like they're not that great of a shot.
They're awful. Their cloning genetic pool has been severely corrupted, and they're complete idiots.
I just thought that was like out of the many things that people like picking on Star Wars, that was like my biggest. I was like, wait, what? And like even Obi-Wan is like, wait, what?
Yeah, as a diehard Star Wars fan, I have to come clean and admit there are problems with the plot. I know. That's one of them, and the other one is Obi-Wan so adamantly saying, "I don't know who R2-D2 is." Like, wow.
He's like, I don't remember owning a droid, and he remembers me. And I'm like,
did he hit his head? Does he have Alzheimer's? I don't know. Is he hiding it?
See, but the consistency is not real because Luke goes off and becomes an old man and he remembers everything. So I was just like, what?
One of the things that I love to make fun of concerning Star Trek is how the aliens are always humanoid, like to the T. They maybe have different colored skin. They may have a different texture on their head, but they look just like humans. I'm like, if we're going to go with an atheistic universe where evolution has developed life across the galaxy, they're not going to look like us. Especially, I know the origins of this is low budget TV shows in the 60s. That's all they could do, right? But I feel like the trend has kind of stuck. And one thing I love about Star Wars is the aliens are so wild. They're still kind of human. They got 2 legs, 2 arms, most of them at least. But at least they're like really out there designs where you kind of say, God, that's an ugly alien. But then I have to realize, wait, like to them that's normal, and we're probably super ugly and gross. But with Star Trek, I'm just like, oh, it's another beautiful looking supermodel alien. Like, I don't know. It's one of their tropes, I guess.
Yeah, it is. Even as a Trekkie, I will say one of my biggest issues, and they try to explain it, are the Klingons.
I know you're going. Yeah.
I mean, you look at the original series, and the Klingons were very human, and then all of a sudden, they start introducing the forehead ridges of the Klingons, and then by the time we get to Next Generation, you look at Worf, and you're like, okay, that's not a forehead ridge. They're like, that's an entire like plate in your head. But then it got even worse if you go back and watch Discovery, or even look at anything online about Discovery, or look at Google Klingons Star Trek Discovery, and they're completely different than anything that we've ever even seen or hinted at. The spaceships are their birds of prey are completely different. I mean, it's wildly different, and so I've had an issue with that. It's funny going back and rewatching Star Trek Next Generation, like my wife and I are doing. They started introducing some different alien races that were bigger roles in like Deep Space Nine, and you can see the evolution of, well, hey, we really liked this alien, so we're going to keep them, but we've got to change it up a little bit. Like, they didn't really look all that great here, so we're going to make them look better and
soup them up.
And I think one of the big ones that comes to mind right now are the Cardassians, where
not to be confused with the Kardashians.
Yes.
Keeping up with the Cardassians.
I would much rather watch that than the Kardashians. Well, in Next Gen, the Cardassians had this kind of flesh tone, kind of a tan, a little bit browner flesh tone. But when you get into Deep Space Nine, the Cardassians are gray, and even their clothing is different. I mean, there's just been little continuity issues for me.
Yeah. Now, I had read about, as much as I don't know about the Star Trek universe, somehow I did come across the whole Klingon changing issue. And I believe, wasn't there like one throwaway line where they're like, yeah, that was a rough time for us, or something like that, where they kind of hint that, yeah, we've been changing over time, and we change, and this is how we are now. We didn't look good back then, but now we're better and stronger. Like, isn't that part of their biology?
I'm trying to remember. I want to say that I had heard that it was like a genetic mutation, and kind of part of their evolution, the evolutionary process. But then, like I said, you get shows like Discovery that are supposed to take place before the original series. It is a wildly different character.
Another one of my big things against Star Trek that I like to think about and laugh about, but it also brings up some great concepts and thought experiments, is the transporter. So I don't know how much they describe how it works, but it's basically digitizing you, right, Josh, and sending that data to a receiver, or it's projecting it, and you are reassembled atomically. Is that right?
Yeah.
Because there's not a receiver. You can beam you down to the planet, and there's nothing there. It's just boom. There's like a laser beam, and you're reconstructed somehow.
Yeah.
So first of all, how the heck are you reconstructed? And second of all, if you're digitized, what happened to your original body? And is the new teleported version, is that really the original you? Does it have your soul? Does it have your spirit? Is it a new you? I don't know. It's just, that's a little bit of a mind bend. And definitely a stretch for science. But before you defend it, I have to explain that I do understand that this is another drawback to the low budget on the original show, because they wanted to go down to the planet, to solve these crimes and solve these issues, like the old Western format. But that's a lot of money, sending a shuttle down to the planet and doing a special effects shot for every time they land on a planet and then leave. So they cut the budget by just saying, we'll have a transporter and send them down. Therefore, they don't need any VFX shots of a shuttle or anything like that. And also saves on prop creation too, because they don't actually have to have that transporting shuttle. Okay, so sorry, you go ahead. I'll give it back to you. I just had to get that out of my system.
Well, now that your statement has made my nose bleed, I'm not entirely sure how to answer that. I will actually throw this in real quick. So the transporter, like you said, it was a way to solve the budget issue of how do we get him from the ship to the planet, or how do we get him from our one ship to the other ship. It was Star Wars also did a similar thing with the hyperdrive. getting from point A to point B very quickly.
Yeah.
Both have had those budget issues that they've had to solve with things like that. But as far as the teleportation of a human or an alien, I don't know.
One of the few things they don't explain too deep because they know it. It can only go so far.
Yeah, they don't explain very deep as far as, they do explain that it does break the body down to the
subatomic particles. And
and then those are put into a pattern buffer and it filters out. So if you're down on an alien planet and you happen to contract a disease or something bites you, you get a alien mosquito bite. As they, sounds awful.
Scary.
As they transport you back to the ship, your molecules are run through the pattern buffer and it will actually take any of that out. If it's not part of you originally, it doesn't put it through. And
but then it leaves memories.
Yes. And then when it reconstructs you don't have that alien mosquito bite or the disease or the infection or something. There have been a few episodes where things have gotten through. But
are there any where the transporter malfunctions and does weird stuff?
Yeah, there's actually been a couple where the transporter malfunctioned and actually kills the person.
Like on Galaxy Quest? Oh my God, I love that scene.
Inside Out.
So funny.
Yes.
Is it working? Yeah.
So yeah, I mean there have been those issues, but I mean, is it you? What happens to your body? Those deeper philosophical questions. I don't have an answer for you.
I thought so. Just kidding. Hey, I can't explain how the Force works either, so tie.
Yeah, there you go.
Be one with the Earth. Be one with yourself. That's about as much
feel good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, when I'm one with the Earth, it makes me want to kill everybody. So I guess that's right? Good old relative morality.
Just to kind of point back at what Josh was saying is, even as much as I love Star Wars, there's a lot of flaws. I mean, but I think the biggest thing is it's sad to think that at the beginning, and I understand why, because Lucas had companies investing in him. The mess it brought by him starting on episode 4, I personally believe we just kind of jumped in, and there's been a lot of explaining, like Josh was pointing out. It's only until the last couple of years that they've been bridging and explaining, and Rogue One and Solo, and who knows what's in the future. And then as far as Star Trek, I feel like you think they would be smart enough to know not to mess with certain people, but they still do. And you think they would finally add guns and phasers and all that fun stuff on the outside of the ship, but
we got a few.
I know, but come on. How many years have they ran into stuff? You think all right, build a ship that has, I know they're explorers. I get that. I'm just being funny, but
it is a scientific vessel, at least.
Yeah.
Enterprise is, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like sometimes we're just going around in circles, and all the reboots that we're doing, I'm like, okay. And so there's nothing wrong with reboots if we're going to continue on with the story. It's when we have to reboot and re-explain. I'm just like, I think both franchises kind of stick their hand in that situation where we're kind of beating a dead horse here. And I think what you were talking about earlier in the episode about having to explain mid-movie, that one guy is explaining to the one person that has no idea.
Yeah. Classic exposition.
I think that happens a lot. And unfortunately, it's when you hear someone talking and you hear the S in their voice, that kind of noise, you hear it all the time. So when you point it at,
that's all you hear.
Yeah. So when you point it out, in a movie, that's all you're paying attention to. You're like, no, stop. So I think pet peeves is, now that I know, from past conversation, I'm like, no, don't explain. Just get on with it. Just move on. I don't know. I know when episode 7 for Star Wars came out, I was like, oh, please don't mess it up. And, because I'm like, there's just going to be a lot of explaining. And I was not a fan going into the movie. I was still a Star Wars fan coming out. But the
way I see a lot of these flaws that we've noticed is it's like you're it's like you've got like a house from the 70s, right? And you want to add another room onto it, and you want to make it, add another story on top, another story on top of that, on top of this new house structure, and it just eventually is just so big and rickety and heavy, the foundation can't support it anymore because the foundation is old, and there was problems with the foundation that were overlooked. So you got to go back and add more cement and add things to support that and fill in the gaps, and that's what these prequel movies are. Right? And when I say prequel movies, I'm also including Rogue One and Solo.
Yeah.
And it's just such a big creature. It's such a big monster that it's almost too heavy to be supported with continuity. And there's going to be holes and there's going to be problems, like Obi-Wan not knowing R2-D2. Yet they had to have Obi-Wan know R2-D2 in episode 1, 2, and 3. And the stormtroopers being awful shots, and it's like they didn't intend on writing those stories when episode 4 came out, and they laid down some very basic groundwork for the mythos, like the Clone Wars is mentioned by Obi-Wan when he's talking to Luke. But I don't know if George ever intended on really making movies to explain the Clone Wars. Maybe he did. I mean, he did start with 4, so I guess he wanted to do 1, 2, and 3. But I don't know if the Clone Wars was part of that. They just decided later, hey, let's expound on that one line that Obi-Wan did that sounded really mystical and cool. The Clone Wars. Let's make a war of clones, And they just start expounding on these little ideas. And that's one thing I love about Star Wars, but it's also a downfall of it because one simple line that someone might say could easily be an entire book, Yeah.
They say that one planet, you're like, wait, what is that?
Yeah. Oh, there's a book series about that planet because of this one little entry in the movie that people were wondering about. Someone wrote a story about it, or a weapon. Where did the weapon come from? Oh, there's a story about that. Or there's a comic book about that droid in the background of the scene that you don't even care about. It's just the one of the jokes about Star Wars is, especially with these character movies being developed like Han Solo, is, there's going to be a Boba Fett movie. That's cool. There's going to be an Obi-Wan movie. There's going to be a Jabba the Hutt movie. There's going to be a young Jabba the Hutt movie. And, that little rat creature that was on his tail, he's getting a movie too. Everyone gets a movie.
So I'm like, you get a movie. You get a movie. You get a movie.
The toaster droid. The toaster droid gets a movie.
The guy with the ice cream man cooler running gets a movie.
but we do need a movie about that.
Yeah, and Sky City.
The Rebel, what do we call it? The Rebel Ice Cream Database or something like that? I forgot,
yeah. You can get all types of flavor database.
Yeah. Well, that we're joking about it, but that's actually serious. So there's a scene in one of the movies where they're on Cloud City on Bespin, and there's a guy running through the scene real quick holding this big cylindrical plastic object. It was just a prop. It was just like, hey, we made this techno-looking thing. You hold this, you run with this group of people over here, and cut. Well, someone, I guess, started asking questions. Hey, what's that thing that guy's carrying? Why is he carrying it? Oh, yeah, that's the character, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they made a character name for this dude, and they made a backstory, and they described, that's the database of Rebel Alliance like locations, and he's escaping Cloud City with a database in his hands, So they just make this whole story about a throwaway scene with a funny prop.
And literally, he's wearing an orange jumpsuit. He has some like technology on his head, what it looks like. And he's literally, he has like army boots on, black army boots. He looks like a Ghostbuster, honestly. And he's running out with an ice cream machine. And they have a steal. And I don't know which Comic-Con it was. I think I saw a group of them walking around with orange jumps, like the pumpkin orange jumpsuit, the black boots, and ice cream machines. And I was like, what is that? And it wasn't until like maybe a handful of episodes ago it was explained to me, and I was like, what in the world? Are you kidding me right now? Like there's an ice cream man.
Why are these guys running through the con?
I had no idea. Like there's an ice cream man in Star Wars. What?
So funny.
Wow.
Yeah, if you look up Rebel Ice Cream Star Wars, there's a Wikipedia page that explains Wilro Hood. It probably his whole life freaking story and why he's running through the hallway with this ice cream machine.
I guess the best thing is there's an action figure of him.
Yeah, there's an action figure.
That's out of everything. Like, and there's pictures of like him shooting out ice cream to like defend himself, and I'm like, oh my goodness, like this just blew up in the wrong way.
Oh, that's funny. So I had to Google that. That's ridiculous.
Isn't that so Star Wars though? Is that whole thing?
Yeah, the dirty universe.
Leave it alone, people. Just take it for what it's worth.
Honestly, it could just be a man wanting his ice cream machine, and they read way too deep into the lines. It's like it's a database that he's
They made
like,
new lines in between.
It's just his ice cream machine. He's like, no. He runs away.
There's a story for why there's a blast mark on the side of this droid, you know, some long elaborate war he was in. It's not necessary, but it is cool and it is fun if you got time. You have no life. That's what I love, and that's what I love and simultaneously joke about concerning Star Wars. It's the depth, the unnecessary depth. That's an unfortunate side effect, though, of when you want to continue to grow a universe and grow and grow and grow and make movies to make money, is there's going to be discontinuity between things, and that's what we're seeing now. Josh, are there discontinuities in the Star Trek universe, like what we've mentioned?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember some of it. I mean, I mentioned one of them. The biggest discontinuity are the Klingons.
Yeah.
One of the big issues was when J.J. Abrams came out and said, hey, I'm going to do this Star Trek movie. It freaked everybody out. I mean, even the Trekkies were like, okay, what's going on? Because you just completely changed everything. Like, you changed Captain Kirk's backstory. And I will say that's the nice thing about sci-fi movies is it's easily explained, and I think it's almost the lazy way to explain it, but it's also the easy way to explain it of, oh, it's just a different timeline. Like this
Classic.
one event.
Even Marvel's done that.
Yeah, Marvel's done it. I mean, like I said, to me, it's the lazy thing. Let's try to figure out a good story to explain why it's different instead of using time travel. Time travel always seems to be
easy.
That's the go-to. Yeah, it's an easy cop out. And so
is it the lazy way, or is it the way they're thinking of, like, we can make money in the future to explain this?
It is also it's both. Yeah, I mean, so with Star Trek, you've got the prime timeline, which is the original series, and on through, and
all
then
the TV series, right?
Yes, and all the TV series and most of the movies until you get to the J.J. Abrams movies.
Yeah, 2009, and
then all of a sudden it drops into what's called the Kelvin timeline. They had to figure out a way to do it. I mean, but that is a big, that's a big continuity issue, but. It's explained.
Yeah, but not in the same way that I'm saying a discontinuity, because that actually makes sense. Because within the limits of time travel,
the Kelvin universe, when they drop, is that why when the first movie came out, I don't know so much in the movie. Of course, they're not going to say that it'd be breaking the third wall of like, yeah, we're in another universe, a different dimension.
No, they don't know.
But was that the reason people were saying it's a reboot of a different different universe, different dimension?
Yeah, so with the new Star Trek movies, they actually kind of did talk about it. So in the first J.J. Abrams movie in 2009, you have Leonard Nimoy reviving his role as Spock. Well, he's an old man. Like, how do you explain old man Spock and going back to a time where Spock and Kirk just meet? So we're going to explain it this way. He was stuck, he went through this hole in space and it threw him back in time. And because he went back in time, he changed the timeline. And Kirk's dad wasn't supposed to die, but he did die because the ship that was chasing Spock actually wound up going further back in time than Spock did, and then changed everything, even in Spock's timeline. And so it just... I mean,
it took me 3 watchings to understand the time loop.
Yeah.
And now I've forgotten it.
Yeah, it was complex. I will say that was probably probably one of my biggest issues with that movie was it did just get kind of confusing. I mean, it seemed to jump around a lot.
It's pretty hairy.
And then all of the light flares on the camera.
Oh my gosh.
JJ, I love you, but dude, stop it.
I think Daniel and I joke that he just needs to come out with like a pack for all those all the users out there to use it, because that dude would get some serious royalty.
He really would. But he loves those things.
Dylan Brown has counted 721 lens flares in the 2009 Star Trek film, and 826 lens flares in Into Darkness.
Oh my goodness!
Wow.
Yeah. His wife even came publicly and said, yes, he has a problem. Someone brought it up, and she joked about it.
That's funny. That's really funny.
You can find a video compilation on YouTube of every single Lens Slayer scene, and it's pretty much half the movie.
Yeah, it is.
It's kind of blinding. It hurts your eyes. Sorry, I had to put that in there.
Well, then it makes you wonder, like the standard that Abrams put it at. It's like, what's the next movie going to be like? And are they going to stay on the same timeline? And are they going to have to re-explain? And hopefully it's just continued.
Yeah, they're staying with the new timeline.
Yeah,
good.
They're making money off of that.
Yeah, I mean, it was an easy way to reboot the franchise so you can make more money.
Yeah. It's kind of how when Disney purchased Star Wars, they chose not to continue with what was at the time the expanded canon, and they said they pushed it down to a level and renamed it as Legends canon, or just Star Wars Legends, and they had to reboot it, and they're making new money because they're telling a new story, making that the new canon. Conversely, kicking everything else out. It's just a business decision.
Yeah. I mean, hey, it's all about the money.
Yeah, money drives it all. In the Star Trek universe and franchise, are there non-canon books that are officially like legal? Or how does the whole canon thing work? Or is it all pretty consistent?
I don't know. The books, I will say the books kind of scare me because
why?
Because it's like the Star Wars books. There are books about everything.
Really?
And just go deep. Oh, yeah. No, like I remember being younger and going to the library, wanting to get one of the books because I had heard that, hey, there's Star Trek books out there. And walking into the science fiction section of the library and seeing these shelves upon shelves of Star Wars books and Star Trek books at that time, and just being overwhelmed and just saying, no, like this is something I'm not diving into. I'm a comic book nerd, and I won't even touch the comic books either because it's just one of those. You're getting into just more information than I can handle. So, Gene Roddenberry created it as a TV show, and even did the first couple of movies, and so that's just kind of what I've always stuck with. Was I'm going to stay true to what Gene Roddenberry created Star Trek as, and so I've not dove into the books.
Yeah, there's a lot of them out there. Just like there's way too many Star Wars books.
Yeah.
Although if I had time, if I was in like a timeless dimension, I would read them all. I like the unnecessary backstory telling. It's kind of a fun little Star Wars trope, but apparently Star Trek does it too. I don't know.
Yeah, they do.
Like, is there a Tribbles novel? Because that would be cool.
That one would be interesting, but I would almost imagine that one would be more of a kid's book, like one of those little golden books.
Oh gosh!
See the Tribble roll.
See the trouble Tribbles make.
Yes,
at an exponential rate. Oh, dude, I just rhymed. That was good.
Comparing Star Wars and Star Trek, as a Trekkie, one of the common arguments that is always made is Star Trek is based more in reality, whereas Star Wars is more fantasy. And to prove the point that Star Trek is more reality-based, you look at the technology that has actually come out of the Star Trek TV series and movies that we have in our life now.
Mm-hmm.
The iPhone, the iPad, some of the tools from the original series and the movies were actually developed by NASA after the fact and used in space.
That's cool.
I've always argued, well, Star Trek has given us these things, again, like the iPhone, the iPad, where Star Wars hasn't. Am I correct in that? Or have there been things from the Star Wars films that have become reality? And I'm not talking about your Stormtrooper helmet, Nate.
He's wearing it right now. It's not as easy to find or easy to spell out like a Star Trek. Star Trek did have a lot of great creative inventions that, like you said, became a reality. I saw an article a while back about fusion engines, which is what the X-Wings supposedly use. The TIE fighters use an ion engine, which is a real thing, by the way. But X-Wings use a fusion drive, I believe it was, and they're actually developing technology to make that a reality, and that was a few years ago, so I'm not sure where it is now. So there's that. There is, of course, holograms. Holograms are a big part of Star Wars lore, and storytelling. And, those are becoming a reality, and not really thanks to Star Wars, although I'm sure that the visuals in Star Wars inspired a lot of people in the 70s and 80s to think deeper about how they could recreate that and how they could make different types of holograms a reality. So, sci-fi inspires people to think deeper and make things a reality later, even if it's more of an indirect way. So holograms are, becoming more real. Laser weapons are definitely very real. There's precision lasers that can shoot down missiles way up in the atmosphere. And there's, laser rifles that are being developed right now. Speeder bikes, are a huge part of Star Wars. And we've got basically what is kind of like a drone, quadcopter design, but scaled up to carry a human. Seen all kinds of cool, like flying speeder bikes that are basically using huge rotors. Oh, bionic hands. That's another one. We've got plenty of robotic hands in Star Wars, and we're seeing 3D printed, prosthetics. Yeah. There's actually, I saw a really cool one recently where a prosthetic hand was designed in Blender, which is a freeware 3D program that I use as for my 3D graphics. And someone used Blender to make a prosthetic hand, 3D printed it, and it actually worked. And it cost like exponentially less than a traditional prosthetic robotic hand would cost. Oh, that's cool. They are not cheap. So yeah, it kind of caught my eye because they were using Blender. Droids. This is sort of a looser connection. Maybe this is more of a weaker connection, but droids, are all throughout the Star Wars universe with their artificial intelligence and different specific roles. And we see robots becoming a really big part of our everyday life, as well as artificial intelligence. Things like Alexa and Siri. Becoming, a part of our everyday life that we don't distrust. We don't really think twice. We just use it and it's convenient. That's pretty much what droids were. They were kind of like a slave force, really, an amoral slave force that was, prevalent throughout the whole galaxy in the Star Wars world. Yeah, that's just a few things. And I don't know if that really answers your question.
Oh, no. I mean, it definitely answered. I mean, having the thing, you have to draw inspiration from somewhere. And so obviously we got the inspiration of the iPhone and the iPad from
things touch screens.
Yeah, from things that we saw in Star Trek. And so it's nice to be able to look at the other side of the aisle and say, okay, these things may have been inspired by Star Wars.
Well, in closing, I do want to not necessarily tell a Star Wars joke, but I saw a hilarious meme that made me laugh and giggle. And it was the meme had a stormtrooper and a red shirt, and the stormtrooper was like shooting way up in the air, and the red shirt was still dying. It's like the stormtrooper misses every shot, but the red shirt will still die.
Yep.
I always count on those red shirts to get the bunt end of the deal.
Well, guys, I think that about sums up this talk, and I know the Super fans out there are just like, you missed this and you missed that, and how could you even say this about Star Trek? Or Star Wars. Well, I'm sorry. We're not scholars, okay? We're doing our best here. No, but I think it was a great conversation. Definitely a lot of good food for thought. And for those of you that get all crazy and nutso about, which is better, just calm down and just calm down. We all know Star Wars is better. I mean,
Doctor Who's better.
Star Trek is good if you want to stimulate your brain. Star Wars is good if you want to stimulate your heart. Nice. All right. Well, thank you guys again for chiming in. And Josh, thanks for jumping on the podcast with us.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Well, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Visionary Variety Podcast. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so that you won't miss any of the future episodes. You can also find our previous episodes there and listen whenever you want. We love to hear from our listeners, so if you've got any comments or suggestions for a future episode, you can always reach us at tvvpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again, and have a great week. That goof of mine was almost as bad as when Obama publicly said Jedi mind meld.
Oh.
Almost as bad. That hurt.
Oh, that one hurt really bad.
Oh, he thought he was being so cool and hip.
Yep.
You can find it online. Watch it and cringe.